June 1940, Springfield Armory, Massachusetts. Afternoon light slanted through Colonel Thaddeus Hargrove's office windows, catching the blued steel of the pistol on his desk. A Luger P-08, 22 years old, captured from a German officer in the Meuse-Argonne, autumn 1918. Hargrove had carried it out of France in his duffel, polished it every Sunday since. The toggle lock mechanism gleamed, the checkered grip showed warm patina. It was, in Hargrove's estimation, the finest sidearm ever made. At 56, he had the bearing of a man who'd seen war and chosen to stay near it. Iron grey hair, uniform pressed sharp. The Great War had taken his hearing in the left ear and given him a limp, but it had also given him certainty about duty, quality, and what weapons should be. Now there were two pistols on his desk. The second looked like an afterthought, a British Enfield No. 2. Blued steel, yes, but common, a top-break revolver with a 5-inch barrel. 6 rounds of something called 380/200, small, plain. Next to the Luger, it looked like a child's toy. Hargrove turned it over. 27 ounces, light enough to forget you were carrying it. The double-action trigger was heavy, pulling through a long arc. The whole mechanism felt crude. He set it down with disgust. A knock at the door. "Come." Preston Calloway entered, carrying a thick folder. 42 Civilian Engineer R&D Section. Soft hands that worked with drafting pencils instead of rifles, but he knew weapons in ways soldiers sometimes didn't. "Colonel, the British requisition details." "Let's hear it." Calloway opened the folder. "His Majesty's government is requesting 900,000 revolvers in caliber .380, 200-grain bullet, 620 feet per second." Hargrove calculated. 170 foot-pounds of energy. 176, sir. The Luger runs 350, double the power. Hargrove lifted the German pistol. "What are the British thinking?" "Their documentation suggests prioritizing shooter control, lighter recoil, faster follow-ups. They believe conscripts can master it with limited training." Conscripts. Hargrove set the Luger down carefully. "They're designing for men who don't know how to fight, or designing weapons that don't require expertise to employ effectively." The distinction hung between them. Through the window, young ordnance technicians crossed the parade ground. Boys, really, 19, 20. If war came, and it would, those boys would become soldiers whether ready or not. The British replaced the .455 Webley with this? 1932, yes, sir? Hell of a downgrade. Calloway pulled another sheet. British after-action reports from the Great War indicated conscripts couldn't handle the Webley's recoil. Most shots missed. They determined a lighter cartridge soldiers could actually hit with was more effective. Hargrove grunted. He'd seen bad shooting, men who flinched, jerked triggers, closed their eyes. But the answer wasn't weaker weapons. The answer was training. Assessment timeline. Ordnance Board wants preliminary report in 6 months. Full evaluation by spring 41. They want me to recommend whether we tool up for this contract
and evaluate whether their design philosophy has merit for American adoption. Hargrove looked at both pistols. The choice seemed obvious. The Luger was a thoroughbred. The Enfield was a mule. "I'll need range time. Full technical specifications." "Already arranged?" Calloway reached into the folder, withdrew a document so old the paper had yellowed. "Found this in archives. Thought you should see it first."
The header read, "United States Army Ordnance Department Report on Automatic Pistol Trials, Philippine Islands and Cuba, 1901 to 1907. Hargrove's eyes found a paragraph marked in red pencil. "The Luger automatic pistol is not recommended for service use. After extensive field trials involving over 1,000 test pistols, certainty of action, even with Luger-manufactured ammunition, is not considered satisfactory for military service. Hargrove read it again, slower. 1907. 33 years ago, the United States had tested the Luger thoroughly and rejected it. We said no. We did, sir. But it's legendary, the most sought-after trophy in the AEF. Callaway's expression didn't change. The report is clear, reliability issues in field conditions. We chose the Colt 1911 instead. Hargrove set the document down, mind racing. 22 years believing the Luger was the pinnacle. The idea that the Army had tested and rejected it had never occurred to him. Why keep producing it if it had problems? Same reason we kept certain weapons too long. Inertia, investment, national pride. Callaway paused. In controlled conditions maintained by professional armories, the Luger performs beautifully. Only when conditions deteriorate do problems emerge. Hargrove picked up his captured Luger. It felt different now. Heavier. He thought about trenches, mud, rain for weeks, cold that froze rifle actions solid. He'd carried a 1911 through all that. It had fired every time. Ugly thing, but reliable. Set up range trials. I'll test them both myself. Yes, sir. 1,000 rounds each. Mixed ammunition from multiple manufacturers. And Preston, find everything on why the British designed this the way they did. Their reasoning, testing data, everything. The door closed. Hargrove sat alone. Outside, summer faded to evening. Somewhere in Europe, men were dying. London burned. France had fallen. Britain stood alone, and they wanted revolvers, small, plain revolvers firing weak cartridges. Maybe they knew something he didn't, or maybe they were desperate. The range stretched under forge-smoke sky. July heat shimmered off concrete. Hargrove stood at 15 yards with both pistols. Sergeant Garrison Hewitt stood ready with clipboard. 33, regular army. A man who'd forgotten more about small arms than most officers learned. Ready, Colonel?
Hargrove picked up the Luger first, old habit. The checkered grip settled like a handshake. His thumb found the safety. The front sight aligned with minimal effort. The grip angle did that. He fired. The toggle kicked back, up, forward. 8 rounds. The group was tight. Most in the 9 ring. Some 10s. This was precision. The Enfield had heavier trigger, much heavier, like closing a rusty gate. He fired 6 times. The revolver cycled with agricultural certainty. Check target. Yeek. Hewitt returned with the paper. The Enfield's group was wider, still acceptable, all hits in the black, but definitely wider. Accuracy to the German pistol, Hewitt noted. By a fair margin, run 500 through each. They shot 3 hours. The Luger performed like a machine, consistent, beautiful. The Enfield was merely adequate, but around round 400, Hargrove noticed something during reload. Garrison, hand me that last box, different manufacturer's stamp. Civilian production, Hargrove loaded the Luger, fired. The toggle cycled, fired again. Sluggish this time. 3rd round, failure to chamber. 4th, failure to eject. The case stuck in the chamber. They switched ammunition. Back to military specification. The Luger ran perfectly, but with civilian rounds, 12% failure rate. The Enfield didn't care. It fired everything. Military loads, civilian loads, ammunition that looked basement manufactured. The revolver simply rotated and fired. No springs to judge pressure, no feed ramps, just wheel and fire. Ammunition sensitivity, Hargrove said. The Luger needs consistent specifications. The Enfield fires anything that chambers. Hargrove thought about supply chains, ammunition from a dozen contractors, battlefields where you took what you could get. Run them to 1,000. By round 700, the Luger's recoil spring weakened noticeably. By 900, they had to detail strip it. Carbon in the toggle mechanism,
tolerances so tight that even small fouling affected function. 40 minutes with brushes and solvent before it would run. The Enfield kept firing. They cleaned it once, lightly, quick wipe with oiled cloth. It didn't care whether clean or dirty. At 1,000 rounds, Hargrove set both down. The Luger was better, more accurate, better trigger, superior ergonomics, but it demanded attention, demanded care, demanded consistent ammunition and regular maintenance. The Enfield asked nothing and delivered adequacy. In a perfect world, the Luger was superior. War wasn't a perfect world. Colonel Callaway approached with another folder. The British ballistics data. Inside were photographs, ballistic gelatin tests, tissue damage assessments, and a technical drawing that made Hargrove pause. The 380/200 bullet. Heavy for caliber. 200 grains, designed with minimal rifling engagement, deliberate instability. They designed it to tumble. Apparently, British theory, an understabilized projectile yaws and tumbles on striking tissue. The heavy bullet maintains penetration but creates larger wound channels than stable projectiles. Hargrove studied tissue damage photos. The 380 created wounds like much larger cartridges. The tumbling effect was real. They sacrificed muzzle energy for wounding mechanics. And recoil control. A conscript who can place 3 accurate shots in 2 seconds is more effective than a marksman needing 4 seconds to recover from heavy recoil. The logic was sound. Hargrove hated that it was sound. The British weren't compensating, they were thinking differently, designing for the shooter, not the specification sheet. Stopping power. British cadaver tests suggest comparable effectiveness to the 455 Webley at typical engagement distances under 10 yards. Though comparable is optimistic, the 455 hits harder, but the 380 is easier to shoot. Significantly, Hargrove closed the folder. Evening was settling. He looked at both pistols. The Luger gleamed. The Enfield looked used, honest, like a tool employed for its purpose. Schedule field trials, Arizona, desert conditions, dust, heat, minimal maintenance. Hewitt looked up. Sir, Arizona protocols are harsh. We usually lose 40% of test weapons. Good. Let's see which 40% survive. November 1940, Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Desert stretched in every direction. Hargrove stepped into air, like standing too close to a furnace. 108 degrees, metal buckles too hot to touch. Hewitt was setting up the test range. 4 pistols, 2 Lugers, 2 Enfields. Simple, brutal protocol. 1 week normal use, 1 week environmental exposure. 72 hours, no maintenance except basic field cleaning, then functionality test. Week 1 went as expected. Both designs performed adequately. Heat was punishing, but weapons were new, well lubricated, properly maintained. Nothing changed Hargrove's initial assessment. Then came the sandstorm. It rolled in on evening of day 9, a brown wall turning the sky the color of old blood. Wind picked up, 30 miles per hour, 40. Sand came horizontally, stinging exposed skin. They secured weapons in canvas cases, but per protocol, cases weren't sealed. The test was exposure. The storm lasted 16 hours. When air cleared, everything wore a fine grit layer. In Hargrove's hair, ears, teeth, in the transport engine, in every crease of equipment, and in the weapons. Hargrove picked up the first Luger. The toggle was gritty. He worked it slowly, sand ground between metal with a sound like walking on broken glass. He loaded a magazine, pulled the toggle back. It moved with significant resistance. He aimed downrange and fired. The pistol fired. The toggle cycled. Barely. Moving sluggishly, fighting accumulated grit. Second shot. Failure to eject. Case stuck halfway out. Third shot. Failure to feed. The cartridge caught on the breech face. 20 rounds, 8 malfunctions, 40% failure. He picked up the Enfield. The cylinder was dirty, sand visible in chambers. He rotated the cylinder, slower than when clean, but it moved. He aimed, pulled the trigger. The revolver fired, cylinder rotated, 6 rounds, no malfunctions. The action was gritty but functional. Looser tolerances that made it less accurate now made it forgiving. "Colonel," Hewitt's voice was quiet. "The second Luger is worse." Hargrove walked over. Hewitt had field-stripped it on canvas. The toggle assembly was packed with Arizona. Every precision surface had become an abrasive trap. The magazine well had enough grit to fill a shot glass. "Can you get it running?" "Given time and proper equipment, yes, but not in the field. This requires armory-level maintenance." 10 days in the desert, in combat, 10 days without armory access was not unusual. It was expected, and the Luger had become a paperweight. The second Enfield had fired 50 rounds. 2 minor stoppages, both cleared by opening and closing the action. The revolver was crude, dirty, looked buried and dug up, but it worked. "Run the 72-hour protocol." The protocol simulated sustained combat, no detailed cleaning. Only what a soldier could do with a cloth and whatever oil he carried. Fire 50 rounds daily, sleep in dirt. Let weapons get as filthy as they would under real conditions. Day 1, Lugers struggled. 40% failure climbed to 60. Day 2, the first Luger stopped cycling entirely. The weapon was effectively single shot, and even then only if you manually ejected each case. The Enfields kept firing, not perfectly. Stoppages occurred. Cylinders occasionally bound if sand got between crane and frame, but these were simple malfunctions that cleared with basic manipulation. Open, blow out dust, close, fire. Day 3, Hargrove stood in desert afternoon with both weapons, Luger in right hand, Enfield in left. He aimed the Luger and pulled the trigger. Click. Failure to fire. He cleared it, worked the action, tried again. This time it fired. The toggle moved halfway and stuck. The case jammed at 45 degrees. He tried to clear it. The case wouldn't budge. He'd need tools, a cleaning rod. Time. In combat, he'd be dead. He set the Luger down, picked up the Enfield, aimed, fired. The revolver barked. Cylinder rotated. 6 shots. All functioned. The action was gritty, the trigger heavy, but the weapon worked. Hargrove stood in the heat with revelation settling over him like dust. For 22 years, he'd believed the Luger superior. For 22 years, he'd been wrong, not completely. The Luger was superior in controlled conditions, on a range, in competition, maintained daily by professional armorers, but war wasn't controlled conditions. War was sand in weapons, mud, freezing rain, supplies that didn't arrive, maintenance schedules that meant nothing when pinned down 72 hours in a shell hole. War was Murphy's Law with live ammunition, and in those conditions, simple beat elegant, loose beat precise, adequate beat excellent. "Garrison, give me the Enfield." Hewitt handed him the revolver. Hargrove turned it over, filthy. Sand everywhere, bluing scratched. The mechanism sounded like a pepper mill, but it worked, asked nothing, delivered adequately every time. He ejected empties, loaded 6 fresh rounds, aimed at a steel silhouette 100 yards downrange, fired all 6. The revolver cycled through its crude dance. Hammer back, cylinder rotates, hammer falls. Repeat, 4 hits, at 100 yards, with a short-barreled revolver, through heavy double-action trigger. After 3 days of environmental abuse, not perfect, but adequate. "I was wrong," Hargrove said quietly. "Sir?" "About this weapon, about what matters." He held up the Enfield. The British weren't compromising, they were choosing reality over theory. Hewitt was silent. He'd seen the same tests, drawn the same conclusions. "Write it up, full documentation." Photographs of the Luger malfunctions, round counts, failure rates. The Ordnance Board needs to see this. Yes, sir. Your recommendation? Hargrove looked at both pistols, the Luger that didn't work, the Enfield that did. The elegant German engineering that demanded perfect conditions, the crude British pragmatism that functioned in hell. My recommendation is that we stop falling in love with beautiful weapons and start respecting reliable ones. That evening, Hargrove cleaned both pistols. The Luger took 90 minutes. Detail strip completely. Brush every surface. Remove magazine, clean spring, check components for damage, lubricate carefully. When done, it gleamed. Beautiful again until the next sandstorm. The Enfield took 20 minutes. Open action, wipe cylinder and frame, run cloth through barrel, light oil, close action, done. Simple maintenance for a simple weapon. A conscript could do it, a cook could do it, anyone could do it. Tomorrow they'd run more tests, cold weather, mud immersion, endurance cycling. But Hargrove already knew what they'd find. The pattern was established. Elegant weapon for perfect conditions, crude weapon for real ones. He pulled out his logbook, started writing observations, but his mind kept returning to that 1907 report. The American Army had tested and rejected the Luger, not because they were wrong, because they were right. They'd understood something Hargrove had forgotten in 22 years of peacetime admiration. He wrote it down, underlined it. Simple tools survive when complex ones fail. Outside, the desert night was cold. Temperature had dropped 40 degrees. Somewhere in Europe, men fought with whatever weapons they had. Tomorrow, intelligence reports would arrive, combat assessments from North Africa. The British Eighth Army was using Enfield revolvers in the desert. Hargrove wondered how they were holding up. He suspected he already knew. April 1941, Springfield Armory. The folder landed on Hargrove's desk with unusual weight. Preston Calloway stood in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral. "You'll want to read this immediately, Colonel." Red diagonal stripes marked the cover. Intelligence classification. Hargrove opened it. Office of Strategic Services, Enemy Weapons Assessment. Source, captured German technical manuals. He read the first page. Stopped. Read it again. "Preston, this says Germany adopted the Walther P-38 in 1938.
Yes, sir. To replace the Luger? Yes, sir. Hargrove looked up. They're still producing Lugers. Every German officer carries one. Calloway closed the door.
According to captured documents, the P-38 was officially adopted as standard Wehrmacht sidearm in 1938. The Luger was declared obsolete. Production continued due to retooling delays and wartime demand, but frontline priority goes to the P-38. Why replace it? Manufacturing efficiency. Luger requires 14 man-hours, P-38 requires 8.5. The manual includes maintenance reports, reliability issues in cold weather, sensitivity to ammunition variations, excessive maintenance requirements. Same problems our 1907 trials identified. Hargrove stood and walked to the window. Outside, ordnance workers moved crates, preparing for war. Pearl Harbor was 8 months away, but everyone knew it was coming. So while we admired German engineering, the Germans abandoned it. In favor of simpler, more reliable design, yes sir. And the British went even simpler. A revolver. Hargrove turned from the window. "I need to see this firsthand. Combat conditions. British Eighth Army in North Africa. They're using the Enfield under fire right now." "Sir, you're 57. Ordnance Corps doesn't send colonels into combat zones." "Then I volunteer." "We're about to produce 900,000 revolvers for the British. I'll make damn sure we're making the right choice." Calloway hesitated, then nodded. "I'll draft the request." Inside the folder were photographs. Walter P-38s in production, technical drawings, and one image that stayed with Hargrove. A German soldier beside a tank, Walter on his belt. In the background, an older officer holding a Luger, not like a trusted tool, more like an obligation. Even the Germans didn't trust it anymore. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor burned. America was at war. By Monday, Hargrove's transfer request was en route to Washington. Observer attachment, British 8th Army, North Africa. Someone approved it quickly. By February 1942, he was crossing the Atlantic. 23 days zigzagging to avoid U-boats. He landed in Cairo in early March. The heat was brutal, dry, punishing. He requested forward deployment with armor units. Tank crews used pistols. If they had to bail out, pistols were their primary defense. 2 weeks later, he rode west into the desert with Garrison Hewitt beside him. June 1942. Western Desert, Libya. The British Crusader tank had broken down twice in a week. Captain Wells commanded the crew. Young, maybe 30. 8 months in the desert had aged him 5 years. Wells carried an Enfield No. 2. The bluing was worn. The grip dark with sweat and oil. It looked like it had seen hell. Because it had. "How long have you had that pistol?" Hargrove asked. "Since Tobruk, 14 months. "Mind if I look?" Wells handed it over. Hargrove opened the action. The cylinder was dirty but functional. Carbon fouling in the chambers. Forcing cone showed erosion from thousands of rounds. The mechanism was loose the way weapons got from hard use. But when he dry-fired it, the hammer fell with certainty. "How often do you clean it?" Wells shrugged. "When I remember. Once a week, maybe. We're usually more worried about the tank." "When's the last malfunction?" "Never. Maybe 2,000 rounds through it. Training and combat, not one stoppage." Hargrove handed it back. "Experience with the Luger?" "Tried a captured one for a week. Beautiful gun. Worked perfectly 3 days. Then sandstorm hit. After that, jammed every other shot. Traded it to quartermaster." Wells smiled without humor. "German pistols worth good money, just not worth carrying." That evening, Hargrove watched tank crews clean weapons. Mechanical. Routine. Enfields came out. Actions opened. Quick wipe. Some oil if available. Actions closed. Back in holsters. 3 minutes. The men talked while they worked. The cleaning required no attention. One trooper worked on a captured Luger. 45 minutes. Detail strip. Brush every component. When he finished, it gleamed. "Why bother?" Hargrove asked. The trooper shrugged. "Beautiful gun, Colonel. Hate to let it rust. But I carry the Webley for actual work. Luger's just for looking at." 3 days later, German armor was spotted west. The Crusaders rolled out in formation, trailing dust visible for miles. The engagement lasted 4 hours. 3 British tanks were hit. 1 exploded. 2 disabled. Crews bailed out under fire. Wells's crew came running. 5 men scattered across open desert. Machine gun fire kicked sand around them. 1 man fell, got up, kept running. They made it to a wadi offering cover. Wells's uniform was scorched, his face black with smoke. "Tank took a round through the engine," he gasped. "Anyone hurt?" "Jenkins has shrapnel. Robertson's hands burned. Everyone else all right." Wells still held his Enfield, covered in soot and sand, scratched down to bare metal on one side where he'd dropped it on rock. "Did you use it?" 6 rounds at German patrol. Don't think I hit anything, but they backed off." Wells ejected the empty cases, black with residue, reloaded from his belt pouch. "Picked this up out of sand after I dropped it. Didn't check if it would fire, just aimed and pulled the trigger. It fired." That night, Hargrove examined the pistol again. Worse than before, new scratches. Desert warfare accumulation. But it still functioned. Wells fired 6 rounds into a berm. All 6 went off. Cylinder rotated smoothly despite sand and carbon. "By rights, this should be jammed solid," Wells said, "but it keeps working." Hargrove understood now. This wasn't about specifications, it was about forgiveness. The Enfield's loose tolerances gave it room to fail without failing. Sand in the action, the mechanism kept moving, carbon buildup, parts didn't fit tight enough for it to matter. Dropped in combat, just pick it up and fire. The weapon asked nothing except pull the trigger. In return, it worked every time. August 1942, prisoner camp, Alexandria. The German prisoner was Schmidt, 28, Africa course, captured when his vehicle threw a track. He spoke reasonable English. "You carried a Luger?" Hargrove asked. "First 6 months, then we received P-38s. Turned in my Luger, got a Walther." "How did you feel about that?" Schmidt smiled slightly. "Relieved, honestly. Luger was a headache, beautiful, accurate, but needed constant attention. In desert, that's impossible." "What problems?" "Sand, mostly. Toggle mechanism filled with grit. Had to clean it daily or it wouldn't cycle. Sometimes twice a day if there was wind. Even then, it jammed." He paused. "My lieutenant kept his Luger for prestige, but he fired my P-38 in combat. Said the Luger was for parades." "Ammunition?" "Another problem. Luger was sensitive to quality. We had supplies from 3 manufacturers. It fired good ammunition perfectly. Cheaper rounds or old stockpiles caused stoppages. P-38 didn't care, fired everything." "If you could choose any pistol," Schmidt considered. "In garrison, Luger, beautiful and accurate, but combat?" He shook his head. "Give me something simple, something that works when I'm too tired to clean it, something that fires when I need it, not when conditions are perfect." After the interview, Hargrove walked through camp with Hewitt. 115 degrees, heat that made men stupid and weapons malfunction. "Same problems we saw in testing," Hewitt said. "Germans knew. That's why they replaced it before war started." Hargrove wiped sweat. "We've been chasing a myth for decades. Meanwhile, Germans themselves abandoned it." Early 1943. Springfield Armory. Burma reports arrived in thick folders. Pacific theater was brutal differently than North Africa. Humidity instead of dryness. Jungle instead of desert. But weapons faced the same challenge. Function under adverse conditions with minimal maintenance. British forces in Burma carried 900,000 Smith & Wesson Victory model revolvers. American-made, British specifications. The reports were clear. In jungle conditions, revolvers outperformed automatics significantly. Humidity caused rust. Mud caused jams. Revolvers kept firing. One Marine Corps observer report was blunt. "In jungle environments, simplicity equals survival. Automatic pistols require maintenance schedules. Jungle combat doesn't permit. Revolvers function regardless of neglect." April 1943. Preston Calloway entered with cost analysis. "The numbers you requested, Colonel." Hargrove opened it. The data was stark. 1 million Luger-type pistols, 14 million man-hours, skilled labor. 1 million Enfield-type revolvers, 6 million man-hours semi-skilled labor. 8 million man-hours difference. 8 million man-hours could build 30,000 tanks, 20,000 aircraft engines, equipped 200 divisions with small arms. "We can't afford elegant weapons," Hargrove said. "Not in total war, sir." Maintenance burden?" Calloway flipped pages. "Luger, 4 hours monthly. Enfield type, 90 minutes. Across 10 million men, that's 25 million man-hours monthly difference. 300 million man-hours yearly. An army's worth of labor maintaining complex weapons instead of simple ones fighting. Write it for the Ordnance Board. Full cost analysis, manufacturing, maintenance, strategic implications of choosing simplicity."
Your recommendation? Hargrove looked at his desk. Luger. Beautiful, elegant, expensive. Wrong. Stop designing for ideal conditions. Start designing for reality. Value reliability over refinement. Learn from the British. Remember why we rejected the Luger in 1907. February 1944. Fort Richardson, Alaska. 30 below zero. Wind chill 50 below. Arctic testing. The opposite of Arizona, but equally punishing. Hargrove was 60, too old for Alaskan winter testing pistols.
But he'd started this evaluation. He'd finish it. The Luger froze, not immediately. It worked initially, but freeze-thaw cycles killed it. Condensation formed inside, froze, expanded. Tight tolerances became death. Toggle mechanism locked solid. No manipulation would free it without disassembly and warming. The Enfield was sluggish. Cylinder rotated slowly like moving through cold honey. But it rotated. It fired 6 reliable shots. Bull. Finnish intelligence confirms, Hewitt said, bundled in Parker. Thousands of Lugers in winter combat against Soviets. Worse than useless. Finnish soldiers preferred captured Russian revolvers. Hargrove's hands were numb despite gloves. He fired the Enfield again. Heavy trigger in the cold, but the hammer fell. The cartridge fired. The weapon worked. Even their allies couldn't make it function. Final test. Both pistols buried in snow overnight, 24 hours at -30. Dug up in morning, shook off snow, Luger toggle wouldn't move, frozen solid. Enfield cylinder turned, slowly, but it turned. Hargrove loaded 6 rounds, fired all 6. The revolver worked. September 1944, Arnhem, Netherlands, Market Garden, largest airborne operation in history. British paratroopers carried Enfield revolvers, officers, signalmen, anyone whose primary weapon wasn't a rifle. In urban fighting, confined Dutch houses, the revolver made sense. Point and shoot, no magazine to lose, no slide to maintain. 9 days later, reports came back. Market Garden failed. Bridge lost. But small arms data was clear. Enfield revolvers, negligible malfunctions across 9 days, continuous urban combat. Captured German pistols, 50% of Lugers non-functional by day 5. P-38's better, but still showed issues. The embarrassing British pistol outlasted the German masterpiece. Again, Hargrove read reports in headquarters 50 miles from Arnhem. Outside, war continued. Inside, data told a story he'd spent 5 years learning. Simple weapons survived what elegant ones couldn't. The pattern held across every theater, every condition. It was fundamental law of military equipment. Design for worse conditions, function in all conditions. Design for ideal conditions, fail when conditions deteriorate. He wondered if anyone still listened. That evening he sat alone. Tomorrow he'd start the final report, but tonight the knowledge settled. Sometimes being right meant admitting you'd been wrong for 20 years. The Luger was magnificent, but magnificence didn't win wars. Reliability did. May 1945. Springfield Armory. The war in Europe was over. Germany had surrendered. The guns had gone silent. Thaddeus Hargrove stood in the same office where this journey had begun 5 years earlier. But the man standing there was different. 61 years old, thinner, greyer. The limp was worse now. 3 continents of warfare, even as an observer, had taken their toll. The 2 pistols sat on his desk in the same positions they'd occupied in June 1940. The Luger on the right, the Enfield on the left. Both had travelled with him, both had stories to tell. The Luger looked almost new. Hargrove had maintained it meticulously throughout the war, cleaned it regularly, kept it oiled. It gleamed under the office lights, a mechanical jewel. He'd fired perhaps 200 rounds through it in 5 years, Mostly demonstrations, showing other officers what happened when you let it get dirty. The Enfield looked like it had been through a war, because it had. The bluing was worn off in places. The grip showed the dark stains of sweat and oil and handling. Scratches covered the frame. Hargrove had fired thousands of rounds through it. Desert, jungle, Arctic, combat. The Revolver had functioned through all of it. Preston Calloway sat across the desk with a stenographer's pad, ready to take notes. The Ordnance Board wanted Hargrove's final report. 5 years of evaluation, 3 theatres of war, every extreme environment. The conclusion needed to be definitive. The data, Hargrove began, tells a clear story. He opened the summary folder, years of field reports condensed into numbers that didn't lie. The Luger P-08 was adopted by the German Navy in 1904, replaced by the Walther P-38 in 1938. Service life, 34 years, but those 34 years were marked by continuous reliability complaints. The German military knew it was problematic. That's why they replaced it before the war began. Calloway made notes. The Enfield No. 2 was adopted by the British in 1932, currently still in frontline service. Projected service life extends to at least the 1960s. That's over 37 years of proven reliability in actual combat conditions. Hargrove picked up the Luger, held it to the light. This weapon requires 14 man-hours of skilled labor to manufacture. It needs 4 hours of maintenance per month to remain reliable. It's sensitive to ammunition quality, environmental conditions, and requires armorer-level attention when problems occur. He set it down. Picked up the Enfield. This weapon requires 6 man-hours of semi-skilled labor to manufacture, needs 90 minutes of maintenance per month, fires any ammunition that chambers, functions in conditions that would disable the Luger, can be maintained by any soldier with a rag and basic oil. The math was brutal. To arm 10 million men with Luger-type pistols, 140 million man-hours of production, 40 million man-hours of maintenance per month. To arm the same men with Enfield-type revolvers, 60 million man-hours of production, 15 million man-hours of maintenance per month. The strategic cost of choosing complexity over simplicity is measured in the tens of millions of man-hours, Hargrove said. Man-hours that could build tanks, planes, artillery, man-hours that could win wars. Calloway looked up from his notes. "What's your recommendation to the board?" Hargrove was quiet for a moment. This recommendation would shape American small arms doctrine for decades. It needed to be right. My recommendation is that we design for the 95%, not the 5%. We design for conscripts who receive minimal training and deploy into hell. We design for weapons that function when maintenance schedules collapse and supply chains fail. We design for reality, not for ideal conditions. He paused. The British were right in 1932. We were right in 1907 when we rejected the Luger. And we need to remember these lessons. Simple beats complex when conditions deteriorate. Reliability beats refinement when everything falls apart. Function beats beauty when survival is at stake. Every time, Calloway said quietly. Every single time. The report went to the Ordnance Board in June. By August, when Japan surrendered and the war finally ended, the recommendations had been incorporated into planning documents. Future small arms development would prioritize reliability over theoretical performance, simplicity over sophistication. The lessons had been expensive, but they'd been learned. Summer 1946. The war surplus market was flooded with weapons. Soldiers coming home brought trophies. German Lugers commanded premium prices, $200, sometimes more. Officers sold them to collectors. Pawn shops displayed them in windows. The German pistol, symbol of the defeated enemy, had become the most sought-after souvenir of the war. Hargrove saw them everywhere, in gun shops, at shows, beautiful pistols that had failed on battlefields now presented as prizes. Young men who hadn't fought in the war bought them to own a piece of history, to own German engineering excellence. British Enfield revolvers, by contrast, were worthless. $15 if you could find a buyer. Most surplus dealers didn't bother stocking them. Crude, ugly, common, nobody wanted them. The soldiers who'd carried them in combat traded them in or threw them away. Officers who'd relied on them for 5 years of warfare sold them cheap and bought Lugers to display. The irony wasn't lost on Hargrove. He kept both pistols in a display case in his study at home. Visitors always gravitated to the Luger, asked about it, wanted to hold it. The Enfield they barely noticed, until Hargrove told them the story, about Arizona, about North Africa, about men who'd survived because the crude revolver worked when the elegant pistol failed. Most visitors didn't believe him. The Luger was legendary, the Enfield was forgotten. Legends outlasted truth. Display cases reward elegance, Hargrove told his wife one evening. Foxholes reward simplicity. She looked at the two pistols in their case. Which one matters more? Depends whether you're trying to survive or trying to impress. The Luger sold for 10 times what the Enfield did, but Hargrove knew which one he'd carry if he had to fight again. Value wasn't measured in dollars, it was measured in function under fire. Korea, 1951. Hargrove was 67. Retired from active duty but still consulting for the Ordnance Corps. The reports from Korea crossed his desk weekly. American forces fighting in brutal conditions, mountains, winter. Cold that made the Alaskan tests look mild. The Enfield was still in service with some British Commonwealth forces. The reports confirmed what Hargrove already knew. In Korean winter, with temperatures dropping to 30 below, the old revolvers kept working. Automatic pistols struggled, the cold congealed lubricants. Springs lost tension, magazines froze, but revolvers turned their cylinders and dropped their hammers. One report stood out, a Canadian officer describing a night ambush at the Chosin Reservoir, temperature -40. His pistol, a revolver similar in design to the Enfield, had fired 6 shots in rapid succession. Every shot worked. His citation mentioned the weapon's reliability had saved his life. Hargrove filed the report with the others. 13 years after his evaluation had concluded, the data kept confirming the same truth. Simple weapons survived what complex weapons couldn't. The pattern held across deserts and jungles and Arctic conditions. It held across decades. It was, as far as Hargrove could determine, a fundamental principle of military equipment. Design for the worst conditions, and the weapon will function in all conditions. Design for ideal conditions, and it will fail when conditions deteriorate. He wondered if the next generation would remember. Summer 1965. The afternoon sun angled through the windows of Hargrove's study. He was 81 now, slow, careful in his movements. The limp had become a shuffle. His hands shook slightly, but his mind was clear, sharp enough to know what mattered and what didn't. His grandson Timothy sat across from him, 18 years old, strong, healthy, about to enlist in the Marine Corps. The world was changing, new conflicts, new technologies. Timothy would see service, would carry weapons Hargrove had never imagined. The thought made Hargrove's chest tight. "Grandpa," Timothy said, "why do you keep that ugly British gun?" Hargrove looked at the display case. The Luger gleamed. The Enfield sat beside it, scarred and honest. 25 years they'd been there, a quarter century of watching visitors admire the wrong weapon. "Come here," Hargrove said. Let me tell you a story." Timothy moved closer. Hargrove opened the case, took out both pistols, handed the Enfield to his grandson. "This ugly gun saved more lives than the beautiful one ever took." He told the story then, all of it, Arizona, North Africa, the sandstorms and the malfunctions, Wells and his tank crew, Schmidt, the German prisoner, the frozen Alaskan wastes. 5 years of learning that elegance was a luxury and reliability was a necessity. Timothy listened, really listened, turning the Enfield over in his hands, feeling the worn grip, the scratches, the evidence of use. "So the British gun was better?" Timothy asked. "Better is the wrong word, more reliable, more forgiving, better suited to reality." Hargrove took the revolver back, opened the action. The mechanism still worked smoothly, despite being 40 years old. "This weapon asks nothing of you except to pull the trigger. In return, it works, every time, under any conditions." "What about the Luger?" "The Luger asks you to maintain it, to feed it quality ammunition, to keep it clean and properly lubricated. It demands perfect conditions, and when conditions aren't perfect, it fails." Hargrove closed the Enfield's action. The cylinder locked up with a solid click. "Son, you're about to become a Marine. You're going to carry weapons I've never seen, new rifles, new pistols, technology I can't imagine. But the fundamental truth doesn't change. When you're issued a weapon, ask yourself one question. Will this work when I'm exhausted, when it's dirty, when I haven't maintained it properly, when everything has gone wrong?" Timothy nodded slowly. "If the answer is yes, that's a good weapon. If the answer is no, that's a weapon that will get you killed."
Timothy held the Enfield carefully. "Did you ever regret spending 20 years being wrong?" Hargrove smiled. "Every day, but I don't regret the 5 years I spent learning to be right." "I'll remember that." "You'll forget. Then something will remind you. A weapon that fails when you need it. A beautiful tool that demands more than you can give. And you'll remember this conversation." Hargrove paused. "Keep this. Take it with you. You won't carry it in combat, but keep it as a reminder."
Simple works, reliable works, function beats beauty when survival is at stake. Every time? Every single time. They sat together in the quiet study. Outside, the world was changing. New wars, new weapons, new generations learning old lessons. Hargrove knew he wouldn't see how it turned out, but he'd taught what he could, passed on what he'd learned. Sometimes being right meant admitting you'd been wrong. Sometimes wisdom meant choosing the ugly tool over the beautiful one. Sometimes survival meant accepting reliable instead of demanding perfect. The Luger would outlive him. Collector's item, museum piece, worth thousands of dollars. The Enfield would outlive him too, but it would die in someone's hand, still working, still reliable, still asking nothing and delivering everything. He knew which legacy mattered more. April 1968. Springfield Armory Museum. Hargrove was 84, moving slowly, breathing carefully. The doctors said he had maybe a year, maybe less. He'd come to the museum to donate the pistols. Both of them. They belonged here, part of the historical record. The curator was a young man, 40 perhaps, too young to have fought in the war. He handled the Luger with reverence, set it carefully in the display case, then reached for the Enfield. "Wait," Hargrove said. "I want to write the placard myself." The curator provided a card and a pen. Hargrove's hand shook, but the words came clearly. For the Luger, he wrote, "Luger P08, German service pistol, 1904 to 1938, engineer's dream, soldier's burden, beautiful in ideal conditions, unreliable in reality." For the Enfield, Enfield No. 2, British service pistol, 1932 to 1969, the embarrassing gun that won. Simple, crude, reliable, worked when elegant weapons failed. The curator read both placards. "This is unconventional, Colonel. It's honest, That's more important. Hargrove looked at both pistols in the case. Together, one last time, the elegant weapon and the reliable one, the beautiful failure and the ugly success. People will come here, Hargrove said quietly, and they'll admire the Luger. They'll think it's superior because it's beautiful, because it represents precision engineering, because it's German. And the Enfield, they'll barely notice it until they read the placard. And maybe, if they're smart, they'll understand. Understand what, sir? Hargrove touched the glass case. His reflection stared back. Old, worn, like the Enfield, but still here, still functional. That forgiveness matters more than elegance. That simple beats complex when everything falls apart. That the weapon you can rely on when you're scared and tired and everything has gone wrong is worth more than the weapon that looks beautiful in a display case. He turned to leave. The curator called after him. Colonel, this wisdom, where did it come from? Hargrove stopped, looked back at the two pistols. From being wrong for 20 years, and finally learning to be right. He walked out of the museum into the spring afternoon. Behind him, the Luger gleamed under museum lights. The Enfield sat beside it, scarred and honest. Two pistols, two philosophies, one lesson. Function beats beauty when survival is at stake, every single time. That evening, Hargrove sat in his study one last time. The display case was empty now. Both pistols were in the museum. 25 years they'd sat on his desk, evidence of a lesson learned too slowly. He thought about Wells and his tank crew, about Schmidt in the prison camp, about the men who'd carried crude revolvers through hell and survived because those revolvers asked nothing and delivered everything. He thought about the 22 years he'd spent polishing a beautiful weapon that would have gotten him killed. And he thought about Timothy, carrying the Enfield's lesson, if not the weapon itself. Maybe the next generation would remember. Maybe they'd design for reality instead of ideal conditions. Maybe they'd value reliability over elegance. Or maybe they'd have to learn it the hard way. The way Hargrove had. His wife found him asleep in his chair, the empty display case reflecting lamplight. He looked peaceful, like a man who'd finished his work. Hargrove died in March 1969. The Enfield was withdrawn from British service that same year. 37 years of reliable service. The Luger remained in museums and collections, admired and valuable. The weapon men wanted to own but wouldn't trust to save their lives. Timothy returned from his deployment in December 1967. He'd carried modern service pistols, high capacity, advanced designs. They'd failed twice in combat. Both times he'd survived because of training and luck, not equipment. When he heard his grandfather had died, he went to the Springfield Armory Museum, stood in front of the display case. Read the placards Hargrove had written. A curator approached, an older man now, the same one who'd helped Hargrove donate the pistols. Did you know Colonel Hargrove? He was my grandfather. He was a wise man. People still argue about these pistols, which was better. Most miss the point. Timothy looked at the Enfield, scarred, honest, reliable. He thought about the pistols that had failed him. Modern weapons that demanded perfect conditions, beautiful tools that asked too much. No, he said quietly. I think I understand the point perfectly. He touched the glass where the Enfield sat. His grandfather had carried this lesson across 3 continents, had learned it the hard way, had passed it on. Timothy walked out into the summer afternoon carrying his grandfather's wisdom. Simple beats complex, reliable beats beautiful. The tool that works when everything fails is worth more than the tool that shines in perfect conditions. The lesson lived on. Because some truths don't change. War forgives simple tools. It punishes complex ones. And the men who survive remember which is which, every single time.